if anyone, I mean, if anyone, you've been in this building a long time, Fan, if you've been here a long time, and you have written on a number of occasions, I've seen it, that cliff is unpayable. And you haven't used those terms. Unsupportable.
I might have used perfect.
Unsupportable. Unsupportable. So I mean, listen, all of you work very hard, and all of you know a lot of stuff, and all of you have had to put up with me for a long period of time. This is big stuff, and we will give you a total value when those numbers can be written. But I know that we're not in a position to go from $826 million to $6 billion in that period of time and provide any services. I mean, that's on top of what you'd have to pay for salaries. That's on top of what you'd have to pay for benefits for provision. That's on top of what we'd have to pay hospitals, on top of what we'd have to pay DOT, on top of what we'd have to do for all of that other stuff. And it's not. And quite frankly, if you talk to business leaders, this has been one of their greatest sticking points about the future of Connecticut. It's why we did what we did, starting, I mean, I use November of 14 as if it is the initial starting point. This was one of my top goals when I was running for governor, to get to this point.
Considering that both of the Republican leaders are saying that this is not really a solution, that there should be structural changes, this sounds like a structural change, but anyway, that there should be structural changes, and since they have such an increased number, especially in the state Senate, and this requires legislative approval, what are you going to do to win them over?
I don't begrudge the fact that they want to be in this story. But the reality is they've done nothing to get us here. And I don't begrudge that anyone the ability to say I could have done it better. But the reality is we're at this point because we've worked really hard collectively with input from people in both parties. And it was impossible to institute the plan they gave me because they never gave me a plan.
Governor, Secretary Barnes said that he does have more meetings scheduled with CVAC. Not to downplay the importance of this, but do you have any expectations there'll be more labor cost-cutting agreements going forward with labor?
You know, in my, I don't know whether it was my, I guess it was my opening speech last year, I urged them to come to the table in an effort to avoid layoffs. We were not able to do that last year. I will continue to urge people to allow us to make with them the kinds of changes that would eliminate or mitigate the number of layoffs and reductions that will have to take place in state government. We are. I don't want to mix these two things, and I'm not. I mean, I'm making it very clear. This is a long-term play for stability. That doesn't mitigate the fact that we have to have a balanced budget, and that's going to take a lot of work. And there are ways to get it done. I firmly believe that would be more supportive of our employees who I respect, who work hard. But those are two separate issues. I hope that we can reach some of those agreements. We certainly did it in 11. We tried to do it in the current year. We were unable to do it. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try to get it done for the budget deliberations that will begin in February.
You've mentioned the business community here several times, obviously. How much of an issue was this, because they did mention it in the books, for companies like General Electric, this whole concept of getting the pensions wrestled down?
I don't think it has anything to do with General Electric, because you asked if you mentioned a specific company. But I think it has a lot to do with some of our largest employers and where they would seek to remain or expand their footprint. And we now have a much more defendable, sustainable, and predictable way forward than we've had. Since 1983. I mean, it would have been nice when they understood that Tier 1 had put such pressure on the state that if they had begun to fund it and properly in 1983. It certainly would have been great if it had been done in the 1990s. Instead, we ended up with situations where the can got kicked down the road, not to find a solution, to avoid one.
When private industry.
I know it's harsh, but that's the reality.
When private industry encounters this kind of difficulty with cash flow and pensions, they cut the pensions, even though they were agreed to in the past. And they go to court and they often win. Like say, the average Joe would say, well, why can't the state do that?
That would not have an impact, the likes of which we are celebrating today. I'm not against those things. I did those things. You know, we have employees after.
I'm not talking about cutting future pensions, I'm talking about cutting.
Then quite frankly, the law on that is quite clear, of what you can and cannot do. We don't elect people to be magicians in the legislature. We have to deal with legal realities. We will continue in an effort to bring about more change that will allow for greater viability. But this is, you know, it's like, hey, you know, Governor, congratulations, you read this book, but there's a library of books to read. That's true. Or a library of books to read. But we got this book done. We got this very big issue taken care of. And of course, we have much more work to do.
Because you say we, does that mean you're gonna need her vote to get this passed?
No. It's we because we're a team, like we.
Governor.
As opposed to the little pigs that went we.
That's a good question, though. Are you gonna need her vote to get this passed?
No, this.
A very good question.
Doesn't require, this is a negotiated settlement.
You and Governor Burrell have negotiated changes in benefits for people who will retire in the future. And depending on which studies you read, Connecticut's benefits for these people are either in line with, you know, kind of business norms, or maybe even a little lower than average. But on the contribution end, Connecticut's still on the low side, what, 2.2%?
Well, that's 2 percentage point differential. That's a much larger percent of the whole.
Right.
That's something that I had to go over with my staff earlier today, which led to the difference between.
No, as far as contributions.
Yeah, right.
So.
Yeah, but that's not it's important that no one misunderstand what you're saying. If we are 2 percentage is lower than the norm, say the norm is 6 and we're at 8,
No, you're like
that's
4 or 5 below the norm.
Right, but as a percentage,
The magnitude of.
it's a much greater magnitude.
I get
Okay,
that.
I'm sorry.
It's like 2.5 times. I've learned something since.
Yeah.
What I'm asking is this now part of the conversation with CVAC about trying to get those contributions to come up? I mean, the Republicans put out a number of, I don't know, 4%. So where are you on that?
I'm not, again, I'll answer the question, but they're 2 different issues. I am open to discussions with folks about how we address short-term issues, that's the next biennium budget, and continue to address long-term obligations, and that's things like post-employment benefits and pension obligations. But let us not fail to understand the significance of what's been done today. It was one of my great goals from the time that I decided to run for governor, and it is a momentous occasion for the state to be at this point that we've reached this agreement. That doesn't mean we should stop our work. In fact, it means we should redouble our work because even greater results are within our grasp.
Governor, I think the release said that this does require legislative approval.
Oh, I'm sorry, I've misunderstood. I'm sorry, it does.
It does.
I misunderstood that.
So, would you need Lieutenant Governor Wyman's vote to make that happen?
I think that, I apologize for that mistake.
Okay. It doesn't need to be like a
I asked the question,
Yeah,
so
sure,
what is
sure.
the answer?
So,
Do you expect that you need her vote?
You get paid by the question.
I don't, yeah. First of all, it's my mistake. I apologize.
I just want to make fun of
misinterpreted something, so I apologize. Anybody wants to turn this down, should feel free to do it. If that's their solution to a $6 billion balloon, to turn down something that would cap it at something, was it 2.3? If that's their solution, God bless them.
you know,
Now, I would hope that that's not their solution. And I would hope that people will understand the significance of doing this. After all, we watched it not be done for so many years.
I don't think anyone would deny that this is momentous, this is important, but yet, I don't think there's anybody who would seriously suggest the state of Connecticut would be willing to have $6 billion of the budget go to pension commitments. So, is it, in a sense, was this inevitable? And if not, why not, given that, you know, labor knows that if the state of Connecticut had to be on the hook for $6 billion a year, some pretty awful things would happen.
So I don't know whether it was inevitable.